Hello, hello, podcast family, and welcome to episode 8 of our season Beyond Conformity. You are tuning in to INCRadio podcast, the podcast that resonates with you. We're your host, Angelica.
And LJ, and we're so thankful that you're here with us. And today's episode is going to be about self care versus self indulgence. In this episode, we'll be delving into the trends surrounding this topic as well as ways to differentiate between the two. And today, we actually have a guest with us. So let's say hi to Ate Jem.
Hello, everyone, and hello, INCRadio podcast. It's an honor to be here, and I can't wait to dive into this topic with at the LJ and at the Angel. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be one interesting and fruitful discussion, if you will, with this podcast. So, yes, can't wait.
We are so excited to hear Sister Jamina's insights on our topic today. But before we delve deeper into this topic, we want to first introduce our podcast episode question. So, for all of our live viewers, please feel free to leave your answer in the live chat. And for those who are going to be viewing our lovely episode after it has aired, please feel free to share with us your response to our question at podcast@incradio.net. Now, for our podcast episode question, our question is, what do you think differentiates self-care from self-indulgences? So if you're viewing this live, please feel free to already leave your answer in the live chat.
Awesome, awesome. Now, before we head off to our podcast game, we'd like to give our special thanks to Ka Angel Arano V. Manalo, our CEBSI president and CEO. And most of all, we would like to thank our dearest executive minister, Ka Eduardo V. Manalo. We love you so much po.
Now, for our podcast game, this is going to be really quick. So the game is called Self-Care or Self-Indulgence. And how this will work is I'm going to give a prompt, and then you're going to respond whether you think that that scenario falls under self-care or whether you think it falls under self-indulgence. So it'll be a really quick icebreaker for all of us. So the first scenario is eating a slice of chocolate cake after a stressful day. I think let's do numbers. So if you think it's self-care, put 1. And if you think it's self-indulgence, put 2. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I think for this one, honestly, eating 1 slice is okay. But if you eat the whole cake, I think it's self-indulgence now.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah, I think there's levels to it. Okay, taking a spontaneous day off work to rest and recharge. Self-care or self-indulgence? 1, 2, 3.
I thought Ate was gonna go like
that. Well, the first one is like self-care, right? Well, yeah, we're all on the same page.
So self-care, okay.
Okay. And then buying yourself a bouquet of fresh flowers just because. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Let's actually segue already into our main discussion. So I think because this season is really all about learning about the trends that are ongoing and really trying to understand and determine whether these trends align with our Christian values or not, I think it's important that we start off our episode on what are the common trends or the social norms surrounding self-care and self-indulgence. So I think we'll start off with what me and Ate LJ are first noticing, and then Sister Jamina can maybe elaborate on those things from her psychologist perspective. I think for me, the one thing is fitness, right? I think that especially in the beginning of the year, everyone wants to go to the gym, everyone wants to get fit and exercise. I think a really big trend right now in regards to self-care is like taking care of your gut health. I think that's something that's really trending right now. And another thing is digital detox. So taking breaks away from technology and social media are one of the trends that I'm seeing that's surrounding self-care.
Definitely agree about the whole fitness thing. I'm definitely getting back into physical activity recently. But with mine naman, is definitely about surrounding about work. So I know we talked about kind of about taking a spontaneous day off work to rest and recharge. But like what we also said in the beginning, there is a line where we have to draw it where it's becoming self-indulgence, where we take more than one day off because you just feel lazy to go to work. It's fine to do those things, but I know for me there were days before, let's just say more in school, because work is a little bit more complicated when it comes to me. But there were days where before I would take more than a day off work. I know you're not supposed to. I know that's bad, but it's just like there are days where I get that wave of like just laziness. So after, because with me, if I take one day off, I'm like, okay, cool. It's one day off. But then minsan parang papasarap ka pa. And then that's where I don't have self-control and I kind of go into that cycle where I'm just like, I don't think one more day will hurt, and then that's just kind of becomes where it's up and down for me. But that's one of the ones that I wanted to point out was if you don't have self-control, you'll definitely fall into that cycle where it's like one more day isn't bad, and then the next day hits and you're just like, well, I don't feel like I'm recharged still, so you just go another day. So that's sort of the cycle I wanted to point out because I definitely fell into that before. So
So, as a psychology professor, what do you think are some common trends or social norms surrounding self care and self indulgence that you're noticing?
Okay, so at the Angel and at the LJ, those answers that you gave out just now actually are one of the many trends that are really out and about with the people, not just the young ones, but the old ones and the older generation as well. I would like to point out one of the things that you've mentioned, just like the health aspect, like working out and everything. A lot of people did get into that, especially when the year started. We're already on the 6th month. We're almost done with the first half of the year, but I'm pretty sure a lot of the people are still trying to get a head start with that kind of uh, plan that they might have had when this year started wanting to start perhaps running, going back to the gym, or perhaps doing something about their food intake whatsoever. Okay, and yeah, it's truly common nowadays. Now, here specifically in the Philippines, well, I'm not entirely sure, but for the point of view of someone currently here right now, a lot of people are taking up jogging. Okay, that and I can say that is truly a trend. Like everyone's sharing their routes, of where they're spending their mornings or late afternoons or evenings jogging somewhere, and it's actually quite motivating. And that's one of the things that these trends are, that is that the kind of power that they hold over people. Okay, because whenever we do see these people sharing those kinds of activities, um, you get inspired by it, you get motivated by it. That's why it's really important to always be watchful of what you do share online, because sometimes even unintentionally you share something and you might think it's just for me, I just wanted to share this particular thing, and but then you may never know how much this could also affect the people that may be seeing it. Okay, so another thing that you guys mentioned earlier is what do you call this thing about the social media detox. I love that because I feel like I can resonate to that so much, because I feel like I have started that journey of social media detoxing when this year started. And if I do say so myself, I would like to give credit for, I think I've been doing quite well with that detoxing so far. And I truly encourage it, and especially for the people who are still planning on taking that detox, okay, with their social media consumption. The benefits of it are truly amazing and astounding, and this is like also backed up by numerous research and everything. Okay, so having that control or moderation of how much you spend time scrolling endlessly through your phones or whatever gadgets you may use to go through social media, the good thing that you would feel about the feeling, the psychological aspect of it, the emotional aspect of it, is pretty evident. Okay, especially when you uh, make it a habit, okay, of actually trying to moderate that kind of consumption. There's a benefit to that, and that's why it leans, towards self-care more. Okay, and I believe this topic about technically differentiating self-care and self-indulgence, it's also all about trying to maintain that good balance or moderation of these things that you're consuming, whether it's one particular activity, your favorite food, whatever your personal definition of self care is. It's all about, having that right moderation.
Do you think that that moderation is what essentially differentiates self-care and self-indulgence?
Personally, I think that's it. Exactly, because sometimes I will take into example one of the questions from the game earlier, about taking that day off, right? So sometimes we do need a reset. We need to recharge, whether it's from work or like socializing. That social battery that we often associate our energy with. Sometimes you spend a whole day interacting with people. The next day you just want to sit down and just take a breather and then recharge before you do meet a lot of other people for the next day. And that's very valid. Okay, that's a normal feeling to feel, and that's a normal thing to do. But it might get a little bit, it might lean towards the um, uh, not really good side of things. It's not going to be super, super beneficial if it's way too much to the point that you took 1 week off without notice. That leave of absence, you did not take like a particular permission to like leave for work for a few days, or you just totally cut off people and you just isolated yourself. That kind of is a turning point. Might get alarming, it might not really be also good for you. It's not self care anymore. It might be something that's way too much, and you need to maintain that good balance. You might have to, at the end of the day, you're going to end up asking yourself, is this still doing something that's good for me? Okay, because sometimes the lines might get blurry. We might think that we're still okay, but are we really? Right? And sometimes, we have to do a lot of self-assessment to be able to truthfully answer that to ourselves as well.
I think this goes for everyone, right? So we're talking about how the key difference between the two, self-care and self indulgence, is often all about moderation. But for all of us, do you think that self-indulgence can sometimes be a form of self-care, or are they inherently contradictory concepts?
Honestly, I think, like what we said, there is definitely a key difference when it comes to what a self care is and versus what a self indulgence looks like. So I actually wanna point out about the whole cake thing, right? What Angelica said in the beginning, if you have one slice of cake, then that's fine because that's a way for you, that's it made you feel good. But then afterwards, if you take a whole slice of cake, then that's something that looks
Like, you mean the whole
very,
entire cake?
yeah, sorry, the entire cake, the whole entire cake, then that's something different. I actually struggled a little bit with a lot of binge eating before, especially when I'm stressed. In between like my breaks for classes, or when let's say I'm studying at home, it's harder at home because uh, like I'm just here at home and the snacks are readily available in the kitchen. I can just walk up over there. And sometimes when I get stressed, I tell myself, oh, like I'll have a piece of chocolate and like it will make me feel better. It's kind of like a treat for all the hard work that I was doing, studying for X amount of hours. And then I just go off into this tandem where I just end up eating like a whole chocolate bar, or like there here in Canada we have like individual pieces of like chocolate, but they're like in a big container, and sometimes I just get carried away and I forget that I ended up overeating it or over snacking when I wasn't supposed to. And again, that's where self control kind of also plays a role.
So I actually have a little story about that. In relation to at the LJ, I think there's something that I do where it's like in my head, I will tell myself, oh, it's been a hard day. I need a sweet treat. But then every single day
I know this.
will need a sweet treat. I tell myself, I'm like, oh, It's been a really rough day. It's been a long day. I'm really tired. I need a sweet treat. So I've been telling, okay, the way that I've been limiting that, because the sweet treats, right? Um,
Tell us what the
not
sweet treat
only is
is.
it not always okay, the sweet treat, I always get acai bowls. That's my sweet treat. But acai bowls are expensive. It's more than a cup of coffee. It can range from here like 10 to $13. And so I try to avoid it. And it's also really bad because my friends and I also love acai bowls. So sometimes when like usually I have classes with my friends. So sometimes when we all have a rough day, we all get acai bowls. But there's a point where I think that self-indulgence, it's like immediate gratification, or it's a purchase that can maybe give you a lot of happiness in the moment, but if it's done excessively, that's when it can really become self-indulgence. And so I think that, we have to figure out our tendencies, what are we spending money on, what do we tend to do, like our behaviors, and really determine whether they're self-care or self-indulgence, because I think that they are inherently contradictory concepts, because how I view it is more like they're levels. And so self care is something that's for you, but then once it becomes self indulgence, then it's something else. It's overly excessive at that point. And I think for me personally, the way that I limit myself is I tell myself to just go home, just eat something at home, so that way I can have some financial control over my sweet treats.
This is, I'm really like really happy with the level of self-awareness that's happening in this conversation. No, no, and I'm pointing that out because that is such a vital thing, okay, that we need to have in order for us to do something about this thing. Like I like the question earlier: is it totally contradictory, self-indulgence and self-care? On my own perspective, and I think honestly, both of you have already uh, said your perspective on it, and I do agree with that. Okay, technically, it's not a straight off contradiction of one another, but yes, definitely there's a sort of level there. The immediate gratification of things. Um, you'll be definitely satisfied as of the moment, but if it would compromise other aspects of your life, that would definitely ring some sort of bell or alarm in some sense, and you need to take notice of that. Just like I'm also gonna share something, because I'm when it comes to the part of self-indulgence, I do believe that as a coffee lover, okay, I do have a lot of cups of coffee. I get lots of coffee in my system on the daily, and sometimes, even if there's coffee at home, like we have a machine here and everything, and I can make my own cup of coffee to go, like whenever I need to go to work or some other place, I can have it prepared at home. But then, as a sweet treat for myself as well, I would end up buying the overpriced coffee outside, okay? And at the end of the day, I felt good at the moment when I was ordering my cup of coffee and upon drinking it and making it last the entire day. But at the end of the day, I would be realizing, could have saved those couple of pesos. And if I total the amount of money that I spent for all those cups of coffees that I got outside, I could have, used it for something else, and that kind of realization hits you. And uh, with that self-awareness and the pep talk that you have with yourself, that's not really good anymore, right? You just like what the angel also said, that financial control, those bells start ringing and you kind of wake up with the self-indulgence aspect that was happening, and you need to do something about it, especially you were self-aware enough to know that it's not really um, good anymore, because you did feel good, right? I mean, you did this self-indulgent thing to feel good at the moment, but then it poses a more compromising consequence in the long run. So I think, yes, that's one of the things that differentiates those two things. Whereas for self-care, okay, self-care is a totally different um, field of where you do things, because you know that these would definitely have longer and lasting benefits for you overall, for your overall well-being. Okay, sometimes there are things that are really for self-care and we might not really enjoy doing it, but since we know that it's for self-care and it's like it's going to bring about good things in our lives, we need to do it, right? So, and it might even take some practice of getting used to the self-care activity that you're doing, but then it's for the benefit of things, okay? So you need to be doing those things as well.
I think Sister Jem touched upon it, where it's like there are ways that self care practices can evolve into self indulgence if it's not approached mindfully. And I think we all touched upon it earlier, where if it's excessive and it's no longer in moderation, then it's evolving already into self indulgence. And also, if you're lacking financial control, maybe you're excessively purchasing things just to have that gratification, then it's already evolving into self indulgence. But are there other ways that any of us, think that self care practices can evolve into self indulgence besides what we already mentioned previously?
I just wanted to add about like, for example, like the fitness one, right? If yes, at first it'll turn into a self care where it's good for your body, it's benefiting you in some way, shape, or form. But if it's no longer benefiting you, then that's kind of where you need to look at it in the bigger picture. Sometimes even like say you're going through your fitness journey. I've seen a lot of in social media, yes, they work out, they're buff, they have big muscles, but once you take like certain medications and like steroids and all that stuff, then that's no longer sort of where you're drawing the line of is that really self-care, because sometimes it can be over excessive and it can actually be detrimental or bad for your health to a certain point. So that's sort of where also self-control comes into play, and have a bigger picture and where you need to draw the line where it's no longer benefiting you in some way, shape, or form, or if it's even harming your own like health and as Angelica said, even your financial um aspect. It could also be also drawing into that boundaries where it's too much and it's too excessive. So I just kind of wanted to point that out because I see that one comment
Mhm.
on social media about like a lot of the health one as well. So
Yes, and that's actually a good point to also bring about at the LJ because we're all about, also in the health aspect of things, physically and psychologically, right? But I think, yes, to somehow summarize everything that we've also shared, I think it's really important to always keep in mind that if it's already jeopardizing or it's already being detrimental. So let's say you're taking so much care of your physical health, but then it's already detrimental with your psychological and emotional well-being. That's not really self-care anymore, right? What if you this excessive, perhaps, just an example, hypothetically, you're working out. You started working out. You started slowly and surely, but then eventually you turn to these other uh, medications that might not be super good for your health, right? So that might not really lean towards self care anymore. Okay, there's a proper moderation in those things that needs to be watched out for, so that again, no bad thing would evolve from that. Because the pipeline sometimes is quite quick. You kind of like spiral down when you get the indulgence. That's the indulgence part, right? It happens quickly at times and we don't realize it. But again, I'm just going to repeat the words self-awareness and self-assessment. A lot of those things do play a big role in these things.
I think we sort of touched upon it earlier. Justification is something that we need to be mindful of because let's just say we're purchasing something. Sometimes we overly justify our actions as a form of self care and we don't realize that it's actually already turning into self indulgence. Um, and I think the another thing, like the last thing that I want to point out for this question is neglecting responsibilities. If we become overly obsessed with, let's just say, pampering ourselves and relaxing, then we might neglect the other priorities that we have as well.
And I agree to that so much at the Angel, because At the end of it, if again it's already compromising other important aspects of our lives, we need to take a step back, pause for a while with these, quote unquote self care things that might not already be very um, self care ish, okay, for ourselves. So, yeah.
Mhm. But I think that it's not just like how we feel within ourselves that we should determine whether it's self-care, self-indulgence, but there's also a lot of factors that go into what influences our decisions. It's not just within ourselves. So sometimes societal pressures are a factor into um, how we view self-care versus self-indulgence. So how do you navigate societal pressures to constantly prioritize productivity over self-care? Maybe we're in an environment where maybe in our workspace, there's the need to always be overly productive. So how can we navigate these societal pressures?
Okay, so I think that's very much a reflection of, how powerful also the environment that we put in with ourselves is, the effect of that. So let's say that we are in a position that, we're in an industry that's always, working, and you're trying to keep up. And sometimes perhaps your body is already telling us you need to slow down because this is already affecting your health and everything. So how do you do that? How do you deal with that? Honestly, in today's society, it's really good that we took huge steps of already advocating for mental health, right? Because, particularly mental health, because just like what I always tell my students as well, whether they're psych majors or not, physical and mental health goes hand in hand. Not one is more important than the other. Those two things, they work together for your overall well-being. Okay, so let's say that your body is telling you that yes, you can still do all the work. The environment that you are in is putting a lot of pressure. You can still do it. You can need to keep up, but honestly, you need to honor as well what is also happening within yourself. Okay, and when it comes to navigating um, those kinds of scenarios or being in those kinds of situations, it's important to also keep or surround yourself rather with people who would um, understand and see that kind of situation. And some might say or think though that they don't really have those kinds of people yet. But I feel like um, you might have like a friend or a really close friend or perhaps your own family members. Um, these people who may not really be directly involved in that particular environment, that like you don't work with your family members often, right? So but then when you do get home, having that kind of proper outlet to express and let out those things that are weighing you down, in particular in that kind of stressful environment, it's really important. You need to have that, okay? Because sometimes the pressure in school, pressure in work, it gets to you, okay? And that's very such a valid feeling. Everyone had gone through that one way or another, but you need to have a proper outlet for that so that you can express that. Because if you also bottle those things up, or perhaps you just dismiss it, you ignore it, you don't validate those feelings, that is also not really going to be good for you, your overall, health aspect.
I think just to add to that point, one thing that we can do for ourselves besides, let's just say you making use of our relationships to benefit us as well, right? In prioritizing self-care. I think something that we can do for ourselves, just looking at it from being in a work environment or maybe a school environment, is also how we plan out our day. It can start as something as simple as that, where we make sure that we draw the boundary between our work time or productivity time, but also time for ourselves and time for our loved ones as well, because that sort of balance is what is essentially going to keep us going. Because even rest, one of the things that I've been learning is that rest, as long as it's done in moderation, is what's going to help your long-term productivity. If you're not sleeping, if you're not taking care of your body, sometimes you might get sick and then it'll affect your ability to actually do your work. especially as a student. That's something that I've been learning a lot recently because sometimes during semester I was getting sick a lot, and I wasn't taking enough breaks. So it's really important to rest because if you get sick, then it might take longer for you to recover even, and might affect also, all the work that you have ahead of you. So maintaining that balance is what's really going to help us with our self-care.
So it was my first term going into university, and that was really hard for me to navigate because all I had in my life at the time was just going to church and work. And I didn't know how to incorporate school into my schedule. So definitely it was such a hard way to navigate because at this point in the semester, I actually have sort of my own schedule now that I can go by, because before I didn't know where do I put studying in between all of these things in my life, and like where do I find the time to study, or what time do I need to sleep. And what actually worked for me is that I need to be in bed by 1 a.m. I know it sounds really late. It sounds really late, but I would take a nap after I get home from work. So I'd go to work first, and then I have class, and then right when I get home from work, I'll go eat, kind of take a little breather, and then take a nap, and then go back to studying. So I that's sort of one way I've it has helped me to kind of also, like what Angelica say, is increase the productivity that we've had already. And it also helps me to kind of stay awake and focus on what I'm actually doing, because I tried it the other way where I'll just come home from work, I'll eat, I don't take a break. I just go back into studying like right away, and I go for hours on end. But I saw myself taking more frequent breaks than versus the way I did it the other way. So definitely, yes, be mindful of getting sleep because that's important. And I know also for our health, it's a way for us to repair at night, right? So when you have your sleep, it's a way for us to kind of also get the body to reset mentally and us also physically. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, honestly. And when it comes to sleep, my college self would probably be quite annoyed always having to hear, take sleeps, always get enough sleep. But right now at this age of mine, even though I do might still look like I'm in college, but it's been a few years now since that era had, we've already graduated and everything. But then I do value the level of value for sleep just becomes way more important as we get older. But why should we wait till we get old before we put value with sleep and rest, right? So it's really good. It's honestly refreshing to hear at the LJ, at the Angel, just with this kind of conversation that we're having. It's really nice to meet such self-aware people, because upon hearing as well your answers, what I'm getting from here is that you guys really know yourselves in such a way that you know what works for you. Because one thing that is quite important to keep in mind is that all of us have our own um, coping mechanisms. I would use that term. We have our own self care ways. Okay, because we cannot truly impose how we do it to other people because it might not be as effective to other people as how it is for you all the time, right? So no one knows ourselves better than us at the end of the day. So it takes that kind of level of self awareness to know what stresses us out, what makes us feel these different emotions, and what works best for us to manage those things.
This question can also be turned around as well, right? So, what are societal pressures that may constantly prioritize self-indulgence, and how would we navigate those?
Honestly, right off the bat, I would be thinking of just detaching myself from those sources that give out those kinds of societal pressures, but some might argue that it might be out of their control to just fully detach from those kinds of situations. So it takes a lot of mental strength, to be honest. These things, when navigating these, particularly when dealing with societal pressures, it's not always like a switch that you can just flip off if you want to just, get a good head start of renewing your ways of doing things. Okay, it takes a lot of mental work, emotional, and actually your overall being. So having that good support system as well that would understand why you're doing these things. For example, you chose to really detoxify yourself from these sources that provide you these particular societal pressures when it comes to self-indulgence. So some people might misinterpret that as, oh, why is she, or why are they, why are they pulling away, or why did they suddenly stop doing this or that. Okay, some people might not really see the whys or the reasons how, and sometimes you don't entirely need to explain it to them, but having the people around you who can see why you're doing this as well, um, it helps with the way that you will be doing these changes in your life. Okay, peer pressure, societal pressure, all those types of pressure, it's always, you know, we might give out these tips how to deal with these things, but it's always easier said than done, to be honest. Okay, we live in a society wherein sometimes it's really hard to just stray away from particular things. Okay, but also knowing what our principles are and how strong we might stick with them, and knowing what's also good for us and everything, it helps a lot, okay, with how we would navigate our journey in this society.
And I think that just as we all have um, maybe different ways to cope with things, I think it's also important just like to um, expand on the whole idea of, being really self-aware. I think it's also important for us to understand our behaviors and also the different types of ways that we can navigate away from prioritizing self-indulgence, because although we give tips, not one method will work for everyone. And so it's important for us to kind of even some try to do some trial and error, see what's working for you. And even if you're trying to stay away from self-indulgence, then it can start small, kind of incorporating more healthier habits into maybe self-indulgent behaviors that you might have to slowly stray away from that self-indulgent behavior. Just going off about the ways that we can properly take care of ourselves. So, how do we take care of ourselves? Just to close off our discussion, how can we take care of ourselves without it turning into self indulgence?
Okay, so we can take care of ourselves without crossing the line of being too self-indulgent by always knowing that too much is anything that's too much or too less is not good. Okay, I mean, having to remind ourselves of that when you do something that might be way more than necessary, sometimes indulging yourself with a sweet treat, in a particular scenario, there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you want to have that second slice of cake, that's no problem. Okay, but then you need, if this would definitely start having these particular um this would result into particular grievances or detrimental factors in your life, then you need to take a pause and start reassessing as to how these certain actions might not lead to um, not good things. It's you're becoming way too self-indulgent in a sense that you're already kind of losing track of things. Okay, you might be swarmed with that gratification that you're feeling as of this moment, but then um, it takes a lot of willpower, but I believe that every one of us can um, uh, get to that kind of level wherein we kind of jolt ourselves back into this kind of state where we know that some doing something that's way too much is already not good. We need to stop and do a little bit more of those assessments that we do with ourselves so that we can take another path perhaps, or another way, so that we would never again cross that kind of a line for doing things too way too much to the point that it's already not good for us.
And I think just to add on to your points, um, I think that it's also important to develop a sort of consistency where we have these self-care routines, ways that we are teaching ourselves to take care of ourselves, but also these routines having limits as well. So that way we set the boundary between self-care and self-indulgence. And I think another thing is also practicing making mindful choices. So I think one of the ways that we can really assess whether it's self-care or just self-indulgence is how it benefits us on the long run. Because oftentimes self-indulgence, it's just short-term gratification. And then afterwards, we feel bad about it. For example, if we spend a lot of money just trying to treat ourselves, afterwards, it hurts us financially. So if we assess ourselves and we're mindful of how our actions are affecting us on the long run, it can help us to really ensure that we are taking care of ourselves and it's not just self-indulgence.
Yeah, I totally agree. And a lot of the times you need that self reflection also can be a form of self care where we think about what we've done and also what are some things that are currently working for us. So basically, taking off lists that might not be beneficial to us anymore. So in a way that, we can find a different alternative. Because sometimes when we have those self indulgences, like what Ate Jem was saying earlier, sometimes it happens so fast and we don't know that's a self-indulgence, and once we do realize, then we try to detach ourselves or take that off of out of our system. But then sometimes it's harder said than done, like what she said earlier. Maybe one of the ways that we can kind of, slowly get off of that cycle is maybe have a different alternative. So, once a form of self care turns to self indulgence, maybe find another way where it's a little bit more beneficial to us than rather than it being that self indulgence and that cycle that keeps happening over and over again. So that's sort of just what I wanted to add is as one of the ways we can properly take care of ourselves. We hope that you took something away from our topic discussion today. But let's go over our Christian value takeaway for today. So, as Christians, it's important that we keep in mind God's commandments when caring for ourselves. But let's also practice self awareness, especially in differentiating when caring for ourselves can become excessive. Excessive focus on self care might result in acts of selfishness, which can go against the teachings that we have been taught inside the Church of Christ.
And instead of engaging in self indulgence, let's focus on practicing humility to avoid overly focusing on luxuries. And while self care can be beneficial to us physically, mentally, and emotionally, it is all ultimately our Almighty God that we should depend on. Through God, we can achieve an overall healthy well being, physically, mentally, emotionally, and most of all, spiritually.
And as we conclude today's episode, we'd like to extend our thanks to you, our podcast family. Thanks for sticking with us throughout this episode, and we hope you have learned a little something from us today, and we hope that you're looking forward to what we have in store for the rest of this season so that we can keep growing in faith together, one INC Radio podcast episode at a time.
And as always, we love hearing from our lovely listeners. So please feel free to reach out to us for any comments, questions, or suggestions via Telegram at 0964 243 or via email at podcast@incradio.net. Because here on INC Radio Podcast, we're
We're here
here
to
to
hear.
hear. Bye, everybody.
See you next time.